My brothers and sisters, it's a choice opportunity for me to be able to introduce Stella Harris Oaks as our devotional speaker today. I'm sure you will imagine the emotions with which I approach this task, made easier only because my mother is sufficiently well known that she requires little introduction to most of you. Stella Harris Oaks retired from the Provo City Schools 2 years ago this spring, after serving for 24 years as Director of Adult Education and Public Relations. At the time she retired, my brother, Dr. Merrill C. Oaks of Provo, said, "Mother, you're not going to retire, you're just going to stop getting paid." And so it has been. She is as busy and happy in her retirement as she ever was in her formal work experience. Stella Oaks received her A.B. degree at Brigham Young University in 1928. 16 years later, after my father, Dr. Lloyd E. Oaks, died, leaving her with 3 young children, of which I am the eldest, she returned to school, receiving a master's degree from Columbia University in 1946. After teaching in the Uinta School District in Vernal for 6 years, she brought her family to Provo in 1948 to commence her quarter-century period of service in the Provo City Schools. Always active in community and church service, my mother's experience has included 2 terms on the Provo City Council, accompanied by service as assistant mayor in cooperation with 2 different mayors, and service as acting mayor during the summer of 1959. She served on the MIA General Board for 3 years, and for 8 years was Stake Relief Society president in the BYU 4th Stake. She was one of the founders of the Utah County Family Living Council and the Family Life Conference, which will have its 12th annual session this year. She served as president of the Mountain Plains Adult Education Association and as Family Life chairman of the Utah Congress of PTA. Although Stella Oaks has been a professional woman of necessity, her first interest has always been to strengthen the family to which she has dedicated her life. She was chosen Mother of the Year for the Timpanogos District in 1960. All of this is a prelude to telling you that Stella Oaks is a great-granddaughter of Emer Harris, one of the earliest converts to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the oldest brother of Martin Harris, one of the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. This is the subject of her devotional address. Immediately following her remarks, we will be pleased to hear a special musical number titled "To the Memory of Martin Harris." The words were written by Evan Stevens, and the music has been specially composed by Dr. Merrill Bradshaw of the Brigham Young University Music Department. The soloist will be Nita McKenzie, soprano, and Kelly Jimison will accompany her on the piano. That musical number will immediately follow the address on Martin Harris, which we will now be pleased to hear from a member of the family.
Thank you, Dallin. I am glad to be here to tell you something about a kinsman I have come to love. A tradition is related in the Harris family that in the spring of 1830, Emer Harris, my great-grandfather, just older than Martin, walked a long distance from his farm into Palmyra and entered the old Grandin Publishing Company to warn his younger brother, "Martin, the Harrises are practical people. How can you be involved in a venture with rumors of golden plates and angels?" And Martin made no reply, but stepped to the place where the books of Mormon were falling from the press. He picked up the first book, handed it to Emer, and said, "Read for yourself, Emer." He sat down and read for several days till finished, and then returned to Martin and placed his hands on his shoulder and looked him in the eye and said, "It's true, Martin." Never did Emer's own testimony falter. He prized highly the precious first volume that later, when the mobs drove his family from their established homes in Missouri and were searching for and burning every Book of Mormon they could find, Emer declared, "They will never get my book." And he built a false bottom in a chest he constructed and placed his Book of Mormon there and invited friends and relatives also to use the space. And his family went safely through the mobocrats, who did search their wagon, though, and grabbed Emer's little son seated between him and his mother, Parna Chapel, and threw him from one mobber to another until he was replaced when the fruitful search was over. This very volume may be seen in the Bureau of Information at Temple Square. Some years ago, my parents, my children, and I stood reading the marker erected by the New York Historical Foundation near the road and front gate of the Martin Harris home. This place was mortgaged for $3,000 to print the first edition of the Book of Mormon. What a beautiful, sturdy home. Impressive even today with its thick rock walls. Brother and Sister Kreider, the custodians, showed us the boards with holes that had been used to determine the uniform size rock that could be used as the Harrises gathered the stones from the river and as they cleared the land. We stood in admiration of the spring green fields. In view were the 240 acres that were Martin's original estate. We were fascinated by the water pump. You will remember that Martin had hired his neighbors, Joseph Smith Sr. and Hiram, to wall up this well. The Smith family and the Harris family were old friends, for they had both moved earlier to this western frontier community. The Lord had been preparing two family structures that could stand sturdy together through persecution, now that the time was here for the restoration of the gospel. Nathan Harris came to Palmyra in 1816, just ahead of the Smiths, when Martin was 10 years of age. Nathan bought 600 fertile timberland acres for 25 cents an acre. 2 shillings, really, for they were still using English money in those early days. Martin was Nathan's second son, and our great-grandfather Emer was 12 years of age, just older than Martin. We have been taught to love these dear family members as we've listened as children and then repeated to our own children the details of their lives, their support of the prophet Joseph Smith, and especially we have been taught the standards of integrity and honesty and sacrifice that the Lord requires of His children in these latter days. It was the privilege of my brothers and sisters and I to do the sealing in the Salt Lake Temple of the Nathan Harris children to their parents, Emer and Martin and their 6 brothers and sisters. In the prophet Joseph Smith's diary in 1835 out in Kirtland, he mentions that the Harris family had invited him to speak at the Nathan Harris funeral. And because of their long, close family relations, Joseph had taken with him to the service his mother Lucy, his wife Emma, and his scribe. It was because of the years of association as pioneering neighbors that Father Smith and Hiram could now tell Martin of Joseph's vision as they worked on the well. Martin could hear the wondrous story from Joseph himself, he believed. As soon as Martin could hear the wondrous story from Joseph himself, he believed but he wanted the kind of earthly intellectual proof that he himself could tell to others, share with neighbors and his many friends. Martin was 41 years of age, well established and able in business experience to befriend this younger family. He and Lucy Mack Smith were about the same age. And so very early he handed $50 to Joseph for carrying forward the work of the Lord. This greatly provoked his wife, Lucy. Martin had married his cousin, Lucy Harris, daughter of Rufus and Lucy, in 1808. And from the very first gift of money, she resented both the Smiths and the cause they represented. Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph's mother, relates in her writing, "Once Lucy Harris spent 2 uninvited weeks in the home of Joseph and Emma in Harmony, Pennsylvania, ransacking the house and digging in the grounds in vain attempt to find the plates. In August 1828, she determined to prevent and hinder the work of translation, and she entered a complaint against Joseph Smith, Jr. before a magistrate in Lyons, New York, charging him with attempting to defraud her husband out of money and property. Because, quote, time a suit had ever been preferred before a court against any of my family. Martin was called in court at this time to testify himself, which he did with boldness, and his testimony followed the accusations before the judge made by his wife and the others. Now Martin raised his hand to heaven, saying, "I can swear that Joseph Smith never has got $1 from me by persuasion. I did once of my own free will and accord put $50 into his hands in the presence of many witnesses for the purpose of doing the will of the Lord. I have never seen in Joseph Smith a disposition to take any man's money without giving him compensation for it. As to the plates he professes to have, gentlemen, if you do not believe it but continue to resist the truth, it will someday be the means of damning your souls." The judge then called for the copy of the previous testimony, tore it to bits before their eyes, and told them to go home about their business and trouble him no more with such ridiculous folly. And they did go home, perfectly discomfited. That is a quote, of course. Martin had a great desire in his heart to see how Joseph was coming with the translation. Had a great desire in his heart to see how Joseph was faring, and he walked in the deep snow from Palmyra to Harmony, Pennsylvania, and found the little family with numerous problems and financial difficulties. It was later this same spring, April the 12th, 1827, that Joseph asked him to be the first scribe of the Book of Mormon. Let us try to imagine the feelings of this farmer, noted for raising cotton and linen and woolen ticking and worsted and flannel fabrics, sitting in restricted writing position hour after hour as the words fell from Joseph's lips. And to limber up, they often went out in the yard on the banks of the Susquehanna and threw rocks into the stream, or perhaps wrestled, a sport they both loved. It was near this time that Martin visited Professor Anthon of Columbia University, a story known well by all of you. This fulfilled the prophecy in Isaiah of the man who would say, "I cannot read a sealed book." Brother Richard Anderson has researched extensively into the character standing of Martin Harris, and I quote him. His willingness to involve himself in community causes is shown by his election, with a number of other prominent Palmyrans in 1824, to raise money to aid the Greek independence movement in 1822. And in 1827, Martin was on the Palmyra Committee of Independence. His longest civic task was election annually from 1811 through 1829 as overseer of highways, directing the work of neighbors on the roads in his district. It is obvious that Martin Harris was not a person with talents of high leadership as much as a local leader, extraordinary in his reliability and trustworthiness. End of the quote. Next came the great tragedy in his life when the 116 pages that he had handwritten from the prophet were lost because of his insistence of showing them to persons beyond the permitted names. Martin had great strengths, but also many human weaknesses. He was zealous, enthusiastic, and somewhat egotistical. What a unique mission he filled to have his frailties made an example by the Lord so that we may see how God molds his chosen leaders in bringing to pass his works. Mother Smith reveals vividly the loss of the 116 pages, saying, "After leaving Joseph, Martin arrived home with the manuscript in safety, and soon after he exhibited it to his wife and his family. His wife was so pleased that she gave him the privilege of locking it up in her own set of drawers, which was a special favor, for she had never before allowed him even the privilege of looking into them. After he had shown the manuscript to those who had a right, according to his oath, to see it, he went with his wife to visit one of her relatives who lived some 10 or 15 miles distant. He returned home, but his wife declined accompanying him back. Martin was anxious to gratify a friend that came to visit him, and although it was contrary to his obligation, he went to the drawer to get the manuscript, but the key was gone. He sought for it some time, but could not find it. Then he picked the lock, and in so doing it, considerably injured his wife's bureau. He took out the manuscript, and after showing it to this friend, he removed it to his own set of drawers, where he could have it at his command. Passing by his oath, he showed it to any good friend that happened to call on him. When Mrs. Harris returned and discovered the marred state of her bureau, her irascible temper was excited to the utmost pitch, and an intolerable storm ensued, which descended with great violence upon the devoted head of her husband. Having once made a sacrifice of his conscience, Mr. Harris continued to exhibit the writings, and when Joseph sent for him, he went immediately to the drawer where he had left it, but behold, it was gone. His wife solemnly averred that she did not know anything respecting it. He then made a faithful search. The manuscript has never been found, and there is no doubt, says Mother Smith, but Mrs. Harris took it from the drawer with the view of retaining it until another translation should be given, then to alter the original translation for the purpose of showing a discrepancy between them and thus make the whole appear to be a deception. It seemed as though Martin Harris, for his transgressions, suffered temporally as well as spiritually. This same day a dense fog spread over his fields and blighted his wheat while in the blow, so that he lost about 2/3 of his crop, whilst those fields which lay only on the opposite side of the road received no injury whatever. I well remember the day of darkness, both within and without. To us at least, the heavens seemed clothed with blackness, and the earth shrouded with gloom. How beautifully Mother Smith writes of these things. And she further tells that they were looking anxiously for Martin to return 116 pages. And at 8 o'clock we set the breakfast meal on the table, as we were expecting him every moment. We waited till 9, and he came not. Till 10, and he was not there. Till 11, and still he did not make his appearance. But at 12:30 we saw him walking with a slow and measured tread toward the house, his eyes fixed thoughtfully upon the ground. And on coming to the gate he stopped, and instead of passing through, he got upon the fence and sat there some time with his hat drawn over his eyes. At length he entered the house, and soon after which we sat down to the table, Mr. Harris with the rest, and he took up his knife and fork as if he were going to use them, but immediately dropped them. "It is gone, I know not where." "Oh, my God," said Joseph, "all is lost. What shall I do? I have sinned. It is I who tempted the wrath of God. I should have been satisfied with the first answer which I received from the Lord." And he wept and groaned and walked the floor continually. And at length he told Martin to go back and search again. "No, it is all in vain, for I have ripped open beds and pillows, and I know it is not there. Then must I return with such a tale as this? I dare not do it. And how shall I appear before the Lord? Oh, what a rebuke that I am not worthy from the angel of the Most High." I besought him not to mourn so, for perhaps the Lord would forgive him after a short season of humiliation and repentance. But what could I do to comfort him when he saw all the family in the same situation of mind as himself, for the most bitter lamentations filled our house? However, Joseph was more distressed than the rest, as he better understood the consequences of disobedience. And we have the end of Mother Smith's quotation here. Brother John D. Giles spent 3 years researching for the church in Palmyra. He characterizes Martin Harris as one of the most stubborn men in the church. In 2 ways, this was fortunate for the prophet, for when Martin's wife and friends and business peers turned against him for his association and support of Joseph Smith, they were unable to swerve him from his purpose. I will not repeat the well-known story of his being chosen with Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer to be one of the witnesses to the Book of Mormon. He was the 3rd witness, the one with whom Joseph was obliged to labor and give special help to reach the degree of humility necessary to behold the angel and handle the golden plates, at which he cried out, "It is enough. Mine eyes have seen." And in this great, firm testimony, he never swerved. Once acquaintances attempted to get him intoxicated, and they plied him with wine until they thought his tongue was properly loosed. Then said to him, "Martin, you're one of us. We're old friends and acquaintances, and we're distressed to see the course that you're following with these Mormons. Now tell us frankly that it's all a mistake, that you do not believe what you have signed your name to." And Martin's reply came quickly, "No, gentlemen, I do not believe it. It has become a matter of knowledge with me. Belief has been swallowed up in absolute knowledge that what I have testified to is the truth." To Martin, the Book of Mormon was such a marvelous, that was the end of the quote. To Martin, the Book of Mormon was such a marvelous, revealing modern scripture that it was a great shock and a disappointment to him that it was not a financial success. Indeed, he was obliged to sell 150 acres of his prized farm to entirely pay the publisher before they would complete the book. The printers knew of the leaflet being circulated for signatures of agreement not to buy the volume. His wife Lucy could not endure his degree of dedication and insisted on a divorce. And once more Martin showed his integrity. There was an Old Dominion law of New York in effect at that time, making it unlawful for a man to deed property to his wife, and so Martin deeded the choice 80 acres to his brother Peter, who the same day deeded it back to wife Lucy, thus making it legal and fulfilling his honorable responsibility to her and to their 2 living children, a son George and a daughter Lucy. A baby girl had died in infancy. Now, having lost his family and his property, he was becoming the humble, teachable man the Lord needed. Brother Richard Anderson found the following article that E.B. Grandin, the publisher of the local newspaper and the Book of Mormon, penned upon the occasion of Martin Harris departing for Kirtland. Mr. Harris was among the early settlers of the town and has ever borne the character of an upright man and an obliging and benevolent neighbor. He has secured to himself by honest industry a respectable fortune and has left a large circle of friends to pity his delusion. Brother Anderson further says, it is impressive that this direct approval of honesty of the financier of the Book of Mormon should come from the man who held continual business dealings with him for 40 years. End of the quote. Martin disposed of his property in Palmyra over a period of 15 years. But in 1831, he took up his abode in Kirtland. He accumulated considerable holdings again. He became a member of the High Council and was the first one called by name to obey the law of consecration. And he did it cheerfully, remembering the instruction from the Lord, and an account of this stewardship will I require of thee in the day of judgment. He prospered and was blessed by the companionship of another wife, Carolyn, niece of Brigham Young, and they had 5 children. He was invited by Joseph and made the long, hard trip with Zion's camp to Missouri. There is very little written about individuals in the troublous days that now befell the church. Each household had testing, tribulation, and sorrow. And Martin, the very sociable man involved in every detail of the earlier scenes, found himself excluded from some of the rapidly moving events. Saw youthful Brigham Young, his wife's uncle, assuming prominence that he considered belonged to those who from the first had given their all to the Lord. He joined with those who engaged in fault-finding. And one sad day, some years later, despite his wife's pleadings for him to go west with the others, he helped her prepare a wagon, loaded the children, Martin, Julia, John, and Solomon, and waved goodbye to his family as they left on their long, lonely trek to the Salt Lake Valley. And a few months later, dear Carolyn gave birth to a baby girl on the plains of Iowa. and she called her Ida Mae. And we have an auntie named Ida Mae in our family. Martin would be 87 years old before he saw them again. In 1837, the Kirtland High Council excommunicated him for associating with dissenters. He became a lonely man. And to quote again from the revelation to him, "And misery thou wilt receive if thou wilt slight these counsels, yea, even the destruction of thyself and property." When we are critical or covetous of others in a fault-finding manner and intent, the Spirit of the Lord withdraws from us, for we are using the techniques of the adversary. All justifying of ourselves is in vain. We are left to find our own way back to peace of mind by the long path of suffering. Martin Harris, it is now 25 years before we take up his story again as told by Brother William A. Homer, who has been a guest in our childhood home many, many times. And my brothers and sisters and I have heard Brother Homer and my father discuss and repeat all of the incidents that I will quote directly from Brother Homer in the 1955 eras. William Homer's sister had married Martin Harris's oldest son, Martin Jr., and many times their hearts had yearned for word of him. And when Brother Homer was called on a mission to England, he promised that upon his returning trip, he would find Martin in Kirtland and bring the family word. And for this visit, he took with him a cousin, James A. Crockett, whom he had visited in Pennsylvania, who was not a member of the church. They found Martin was the custodian of the Kirtland Temple, living in the home provided by his son George, who had been killed in the Civil War. And now I quote directly from Brother Homer. "We knocked at the cottage door, and there came in answer a poorly clad, emaciated little man, on whom the winter of life was weighing heavily. In his face might be read the story of his life. There were the marks of keen disappointment. There was the hungry strain for peace, the contentment, the divine calm that seemed to come no more into his life. It was a pathetic figure, and it was a figure of strength." Elder Homer introduced himself by saying that his eldest sister had married Martin Jr., his eldest son. The effect of the introduction was electric. The fact of relationship was overwhelmed by his being a Utah Mormon. The old man bristled with vindictiveness. "One of those Brighamite Mormons, are you?" he railed impatiently. And Brother Homer said, "I tried in vain to turn the old man's attention to his family. He seemed to only want to revile against the Brigham Commonwealth." But after a while he said, "So you want to see the temple, do you? I'll get the key." And now he radiated with interest. He led us through the rooms of the temple and the prophets. He showed where the temple curtain had at one time hung. He related thrilling experiences in connection with the history of the sacred building. Elder Homer found opportunity to ask, "Is it not true that you were once very prominent in the church, and that you liberally gave means, and that you were active in the performance of your duties?" "It is very true. Things were all right then. I was honored while the people were here, but now that I'm old and poor, it is all very different." Do you still believe that the Book of Mormon is true and that Joseph Smith was a prophet? And again the effect was instantaneous. A changed man stood before me, no longer a man with an imagined grievance. It was a man with a message, a man with a noble conviction in his heart, a man inspired of God and endowed with divine knowledge. Through the broken window of the temple shone the winter sun, clear and radiant. Young man, just as surely as the sun is shining on us and gives us light, and the moon and the stars give us light by night, just as surely as the breath of life sustains us, so surely do I know that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God to open the last dispensation of the fullness of times. So surely do I know that the Book of Mormon was divinely translated. I might as well doubt my own existence as to doubt the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon or the divine calling of Joseph Smith. The shabby, emaciated little man was transformed as he stood with his hand outstretched toward the sun of heaven. A halo seemed to circle him, and a divine fire glowed in his eyes. It was the real Martin Harris, whose burning testimony no power on earth could quench. It was the most thrilling moment of my life. And then he turned to me. "And who are you, did you say?" I explained again. "So my son married your sister. I would like to see Carolyn and the children, but I cannot. I'm too poor." I told him that Brigham Young would be glad to see that he got here. "Don't say Brigham to me. He couldn't do anything that was right." And so Brother Homer and his cousin were departing from the door and down the path when Martin called after them, "I will accept help from the church, but not from Brigham. But they must send me a return ticket." And after we had bidden Martin goodbye and were a few steps from the temple grounds, my cousin, who was not a member of the church, placed his hands on my shoulders and said, looking me straight in the eye, "There is something within me that tells me that that old man has told the truth. I know the Book of Mormon is true." When Elder Homer reached Salt Lake, he took his father with him and visited Brigham Young, who said, "I was never more gratified in my life for any message. Send for Martin. Of course I'll send for him if it takes the last cent." Martin Harris spent his time and money freely when $1 was worth many times more than dollars are worth now. It was he who gave the prophet Joseph Smith the first money to assist in the translation of the Book of Mormon. Why, Martin Harris was the first scribe to assist in the translation from the original plates. And he was asked to help choose the first 12 apostles and did many other things, Brigham said. But Brigham Young respected Martin's wishes that the money come from the church. People in nearby wards were given a chance by President George A. Smith to help, and they contributed their dimes and quarters to raise $200, and Edward Stevenson was then appointed to go and bring Martin back to the church, riding on the new Union Pacific Railroad. Martin was delighted at the crowds that gathered in Chicago to listen to him. In Des Moines, Iowa, the saints raised money and bought him a new suit. Then he was a new man. Newsmen interviewed him, and as they came down Weber Canyon, August the 30th, 1870, Stretched before him he saw the fertile valleys, the prosperous homes, and he was caused to remember, by their fruit ye shall know them. And when Brigham Young met him on the walk outside the church office, they wept in the strong embrace of forgiveness. He was baptized again soon in the endowment house by Edward Stevenson and confirmed by Orson Pratt. How dramatic that it should be one of the original 12 whom Martin, as one of the 3 witnesses, had been directed by Joseph to select and ordain 35 years ago. Present were John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Joseph F. Smith, President George A. Smith, John McAllister, John Lyon, and Martin's sister Naoma Harris Bent. She and Martin at this very time now went into the water again and were baptized for some of their departed loved ones. He visited many wards and stakes in the next month, and once the Relief Society president of the Salt Lake 15th Ward, Sister M.H. Kimball, offered to have a new set of artificial teeth made for him, and he replied, "No, sister, I thank you for your kindness, but I shall not live long, and take the money and give it to the poor." Another time they were in the carriage going to take a bath in Warm Springs, and the carriage curtains were raised, giving a view of the newly finished tabernacle and of the temple under construction. And Martin was filled with admiration and exclaimed, "Who would have thought the Book of Mormon would do all this?" Martin was detained in Salt Lake by Brigham Young to address the saints at conference, which he did with might and power and conviction, again fulfilling the revelation in the 19th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, that he, Martin, should bear his witness from the tops of the mountains. And now he could go to his family in Cache Valley, where he would live 5 happy years. He was laid to rest in Clarkston. 16 buggies and wagons followed in procession to the grave, and a marker said, "One of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon." And 50 years later to the day, July the 10th, 1925, President Heber J. Grant dedicated the mighty shaft that honors him as the 3rd witness. I will conclude this narrative as my family and I heard it in the late 1920s, shortly after this shaft was erected. We were attending the Nathan Harris family reunion held in the Ward Chapel at Clarkston, and an old gentleman with a cane was called on to bear his testimony about Martin Harris. And he said, "I was a young barber in this town when Martin Harris came here to live with his son, Martin Jr., and his wife, Nancy Ann Homer Harris. And I told him that I would keep him shaved and his hair cut as long as he should live." And he walked every day with his cane down to our one-store complex where I had my barber shop. And one day he was sitting slumped in the chair, and I was working on his hair at the side, and there was a silence, and I said, "Well, now I guess that you're an old man. You don't tell any more of those stories about angels and golden plates." And he said, he became like an electrified figure, and he reached out and grabbed my arms and pulled me around in front of him, and he said, "Young man, the longest day you live, I want you to remember what I tell you now. I did see the angel. I did handle the golden plates, and I heard the voice of God." And I have never forgotten it, this man said, but I didn't say another word for the rest of that day. Soon Martin Harris, he told us, was in his final illness, and he had lain in a coma for several days, and they had fed him water with a teaspoon, and his voice had never been above a whisper in his mumblings. But now at sunset, while his son Martin and his wife Nancy Ann Homer Harris were outside finishing the chores. Brother William A. Homer and his mother, who was Eliza Williamson Homer, were in the room with him, and he was lying there and seemed to suddenly recognize Brother Homer, and he said, "You are my friend." And Brother Homer knew what his last wish was, and he put his arm beneath the pillow and raised up his right hand, and Martin Harris' voice was very audible through the room, saying, "I did see the angel. I did handle the golden plates, and I heard the voice of God." I am grateful that I could hear that testimony from one who heard him give it. And may we all be as true to our testimonies as Martin Harris was to his.
We are grateful to Stella Harris Oaks for this magnificent insight into the life of Martin Harris, the third witness, and also to Nita McKenzie for that original musical performance, first performed here, words by Evan Stevens and music by Dr. Merrill K. Bradshaw. The benediction on this assembly will now be offered by Professor Richard L. Anderson, Religious Instruction, Brigham Young University.